Welcome to On the Frontline with AI. This podcast series examines how artificial intelligence is being used to combat financial crime. This particular edition focuses on how corporations are adopting AI as part of their anti-bribery and corruption programs to mitigate their FCPA risk. Today we're going to be talking about what's driving the urgency around FCPA compliance, what current FCPA compliance efforts are failing, and the ways AI is being applied against the problem. We're also going to be discussing how recent pronouncements surrounding the pilot program affect FCPA best practices. With us today is David McLaughlin, CEO of Quantiverse, a leader in artificial intelligence and machine learning solutions that are purpose-built for identifying financial crimes. Dave, welcome, and thanks for taking the time to join us for this episode.
It's great to be here.
Great. Well, so we're talking about FCPA compliance, and historically, honestly, this hasn't been a pressing concern. What has made it a more urgent issue today?
Well, in recent years, the U.S. government has dramatically intensified its efforts to enforce the provisions of the FCPA, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Number of companies under investigation has dramatically increased. Greater investigative resources are being deployed, including many more FBI agents. Nearly $2.5 billion in penalties were assessed in 2016 against 27 companies, making it the biggest enforcement year in FCPA history. And it's not just the U.S. that's increasing their efforts. European and U.K. regulators are following the U.S. model and are also cracking down on corruption. And they're actively cooperating with U.S. enforcement agencies.
So given these record-breaking sanctions, businesses should be reassessing their anti-bribery and corruption measures in order to prevent lengthy, damaging, and costly enforcement actions. So when they look at ABC programs now, the ones that they have in place, what do they see?
Well, the short answer for some global companies is, frankly, not much. I mean, the programs are ineffective and laborious. They rely on whistleblowers to initiate an investigation. I mean, if a whistleblower doesn't report something, they never catch it. And, the technology that they use runs tedious keyword searches of emails. It's about the limitation of it sometimes. So, these programs are failing to find critical indicators like accounting misappropriations, mismatched receipts, invoices, expense payouts against travel, and other self-reported databases, unstructured data analysis in emails and text messages. They're not relying on the possibilities that are out there to help them manage these risks.
So given that, how can the programs be improved, and how does AI play a role in helping?
Well, first, let's just sort of put a bracket around what AI is. I think that's an important thing to recognize. And what we do with artificial intelligence is to replicate what an intelligent human would do and what a thoughtful, trained, experienced, expert human would do. So everything that a human can do and more, and do it faster and do it better and do it more consistently. That's the first answer to that question. So, specifically around FCPA, it's like I mentioned earlier, it's been very dependent on, finding the bad actors has been very dependent on a whistleblowing scenario. And then the human will go in and maybe analyze some emails to find out if there's any corroboration of that whistleblowing exercise. And then, hopefully the company will determine whether they have a risk or not. So, the next evolution of managing this risk is to, take that email analysis, that unstructured data, whether it's emails or text or any other source, take that unstructured data and overlay the financial analysis on top of that. Expense reports, travel reports, invoices, anything out of a GL system or an expense payment system, anything that has structured data numbers that can be overlain against that unstructured data that is endemic of a communication, can be used to help an investigator really pull out the particulars of a case to understand whether there's a risk or not. An AI engine, a good AI engine, can just analyze massive amounts of data. Corporate financial data, unstructured data, like I mentioned. It can discern the patterns. It can quickly identify where the exceptions are, where the anomalies are, where they exist. It can quickly identify if those exceptions or anomalies signal improprieties. It's perfectly suited to change the ABC game, perfectly suited to do that. And it can automate the speedy identification of FCPA and ABC related risks that current systems are just missing. They're not catching them at all. Just examples like I mentioned: employee expense and travel reports, third-party risks. What are the third-party agents doing? Who are they communicating with? Who are their networks? Are they connected with PEPs? Are their family members in any way involved with the work that they do? So all of those things that you would hope a human would do if they had time, an AI engine can do easily.
So can you tell us more about, everybody's sort of most worried about, I think, third-party risk and doesn't really know how to deal with that. Can you give us an example?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, lack of due diligence of a company's agents, the vendors and suppliers, as well as merger and acquisition partners in foreign countries, it often leads to a company engaging in business with an organization linked to foreign officials or state-owned enterprises. I mean, that's what the FCPA law prohibits is that. And, those links can be perceived as bribing foreign officials. And that can lead to companies' noncompliance with FCPA. And, in fact, third parties are involved in 90% of FCPA cases, and more companies under investigation for that issue than ever before. So accordingly, the regulatory agencies, SEC and DOJ, are increasingly focusing on those third parties and who they are and what are they doing and who are they connected to. Even obvious red flags related to overseas relationships are frequently missed by really well-intentioned compliance departments and investigators. And this may probably is because bribery involving channel partners is a really elaborate scheme. They use elaborate schemes to avoid being detected. They're trying to obviously hide what it is that they're doing. And, AI techniques are just particularly useful in addressing that complexity and the data around that complexity and the third-party vendor risks around that.
So has the adoption of the pilot program motivated companies to find better solutions for FCPA compliance?
Oh, absolutely. We've seen a substantial uptick in companies that are interested in having conversations about how this technology can help them. Given organizations and individuals who self-report can reduce the severity of penalties through the pilot program, companies are really beginning to look closely at the practices of their employees and agents throughout the world. I mean, let's face it, in the old world, when you had to rely on some sort of allegation through a whistleblower or some other person, you were dependent on that act before you could put a investigative process in place. And of course, you can't report what you don't know about. And that's one of the huge benefits of this technology, is to not be dependent on a whistleblower or some person with an allegation. You can now be more proactive. You can now be more sure that your employees and third-party agents are not violating this law. Now, some companies may not want to know, and that's, I guess, their choice to do that. But many companies now are saying this is the right thing to do. It's good for the organization because it protects us, and we are going to make sure that our employees and third-party agents are not in violation of the FCPA and the ABC laws.
So how are you working with customers to help them integrate AI to improve in that way their anti-bribery and corruption programs?
Well, some clients come to us and ask to analyze a specific concern that they have, maybe about a specific third-party relationship, and that's great. Other clients ask us to evaluate how they could improve their ABC program, and we start with a proof of concept to show them several things. I always group it into three primary areas. We will help them find instances that are criminal. We will help them automate the investigation, and we will help them improve the investigation, those allegations and those findings. And then importantly, we'll help them replicate the learning across, global organizations spread around across time zones and continents, and different compliance officers that have different background and expertise. They have to worry about quality control. We'll help them replicate the learnings from one geography and from one area to another. So find them, investigate them, and replicate the learning from them is the biggest way that we help with those folks.
So as you go through this, what is your technology finding? What are you discovering?
I think the risks that the technology has uncovered, specifically around third parties and who they're connected to and what some of them are doing, just, not all of them, a few bad apples, what some of them are doing, has the C-level executives of their clients just wigged out almost. They knew it was a risk. They had no idea of the risks inside their organization and how those risks were potentially going to impact the stock price, the reputation of the firm, their ability to maintain their reputation with the board. They just, literally, almost every single case knew that they should be concerned, but had no idea the level of concern that they should hold. So, it's allowed them to get in front of an issue, a potentially damaging issue that when they're faced with it, they want to get in front of, and when faced with it, they want to rectify, and when faced with it, want to make sure that their organizations don't suffer from it again in the future. But it's been eye-opening. Sometimes some of the issues that we found for customers.
Well, thanks very much for taking us through all of this, what to do and what you're finding. And we not only thank you for joining us, but thank you, our listeners, for joining us for this edition of On the Front Line with AI. We encourage you to listen to some of the other podcasts in our series. And you can also go to the Quantiverse site where there's more information on FCPA compliance topics and how AI is addressing them. So thanks, David.
It's been great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay.